Hi, and welcome to Eminent Americans. I'm your host, Dan Oppenheimer, honorary Mississippian of the contemporary American intellectual scene. I like saying that, Mississippian. The text for today's episode is Conversations with Kiese Laymon, which is a new anthology of interviews with Laymon, who's a previous guest on the podcast, and for my money, one of the best nonfiction writers of my generation. His memoir, Heavy, which came out in 2018, just to give you a sense, was number 60 on the New York Times list of the best 100 books of the 21st century, and I think that really understates its brilliance. It's a pretty amazing book, which you should read. Kiese is also the author of the novel Long Division and the essay collection How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. He has a new children's book out this year, City Summer, Country Summer, and is scheduled to have another memoir out next year, which is provisionally titled Good God. The book, and this is relevant to our conversation, is part of the University of Mississippi Press's Storied Literary Conversation series, which has been going on for decades now and has collections of interviews with all sorts of major authors in America. This edition of it, the Laymon one, was edited by Constance Bailey, who's an assistant professor of African American literature and folklore at Georgia State University. And Constance and Kiese, you won't be surprised to hear, are my guests on the show. Both of them are from Mississippi. Neither of them lives there now. Bailey's in Atlanta at Georgia State, as I mentioned. Laymon, who did go back home at one point for a number of years to teach at Ole Miss, now is in Houston. He has an endowed chair of English and creative writing at Rice University, just a few hours from where I'm based in Austin. So we talk a lot about the origins of the book, of this collection, both in terms of how Constance came up with the idea and how she sold it to the press, but also why it was so appealing for Kiese to sign on. It turns out, I actually didn't know this before the interview, it turns out that he spent a lot of time when he was a young, up-and-coming writer and trying to learn what it means to be a writer, reading earlier editions in the series and kind of figuring out who he wanted to position himself vis-a-vis and what their lives looked like. We talk a lot about Mississippi itself and how it's affected both of their lives and writing and how close it does or doesn't conform to my very vulgar, stereotypical perception of the state. We talk about race, money, writing, speaking, and what it means to perform for white dollars. I tell Kiese that I worry about him in a parasocial way from afar, and he tells me that he genuinely appreciates it, but that he's doing well. I don't need to worry. And a lot more. It's good conversation. It's such a good conversation, I think, that if anyone ever plans to do another collection of interviews with Kiese, they should let me know, and I will send them the transcript of this conversation and give them permission to edit it to their heart's content and to include it in their collection. 2 bits of housekeeping. Apologies for the missing episode last month. I committed some months ago to giving you 3 episodes a month, and I've mostly been a good boy about getting you those 3. Last month, it was only 2. It was a hectic month. I'm sorry. I'll do better this month. And the other thing is, please remember to rate the podcast on your platform of choice. It makes a difference in terms of the visibility, but more importantly, it just makes me feel good about myself and the endeavor. So hope you enjoyed the conversation with Constance Bailey and Kiese Laymon. Peace. Constance and Kiese, welcome to Eminent Americans. I hereby anoint both of you Eminent Americans by the power vested in me by the Texas Book Festival, which I believe you're scheduled to attend in November. Kiese, is that right, for your children's book?
Absolutely. Thank you for having us, Dan. Appreciate it.
You know, I was going to start with the book, Conversations with Kiese Laymon, and how it came about, but I realized I kind of wanted to put you on the spot, Kiese, right off the bat, and this, I think it relates to the book, and it's a little meta, but it relates to interviews. So I want to read something you said in one of the interviews and then ask you to expand on it. This is you verbatim, although there might be a little ellipsis in here. I just hate when I go to a speech or a talk and it's a Black person and they're talking to a majority white audience. There's so many things that have to be synthesized and explained, and it's always cornier than it needs to be. There's a level of performance for white dollars. I often perform it in a fucking classroom or when I go to talk about my book. So that's the quote. There's no white dollars here, but I am a white person. My audience is a majority white audience. I don't ask people to fill out a demographic survey, but I can guarantee you my audience is a majority white audience. I sort of want to think about that because it's and this is implicit in the book where you're interviewed by some Black writers, some white writers. I don't know if there's anybody who's not white or Black, but expand on that. That seems real to me. I don't want to pretend that we can get outside of that, but I just sort of want to, for both of you, I mean, Constance, I'm sure this is something you thought about too when you were amassing these interviews of Kiese and thinking about who he was talking to and what they were asking him and kind of what the relationship is of sort of famous Black writer to white audiences. So I don't know. Say more about that.
I don't know how much more I can add other than, I write a lot about how important it was to me as a writer to see my audience beyond the white, cross-leg, upper-class New York people I was taught to sort of fetishize. And I think what I said in those interviews is just like an extension of that. It's like Black people have to perform for white people to get out of stores, to get jobs, for everything on earth. So we become adept at it. And part of the reason we become so adept at it is our rhetorical flexibility. Our rhetorical flexibility is partially because of that thing I described. But I'm also just saying I like and privilege the spaces where we don't have to worry about the necessary, like a panoptic, somebody looking down on us and judging us. So we have to represent ourselves to people who don't consider themselves like race at all. But because I like what I do, I like messing with words. There's a pleasure too in talking to I had to go to Massachusetts, Massachusetts College or something like that. They gave me an honorary doctorate, and I had to do like the graduation speech.
Hmm.
And they had graduation speech in their gym. Kind of like reminded me of a small high school gym, like to my thousands of motherfuckers in this gym. But that shit was mad white. But it was also in Massachusetts. So I was like, it looked like I imagined shit looking in like the rural parts of Mississippi my grandmama told me not to go to. But it was in Massachusetts. But I never felt so. But the people who invited me were Black and they sat on the front row. So anyway, I was just like, fuck, who do I give this speech to? Do I talk
Hmm.
to people who brought me to Black folk here? Then what I do with all these white motherfuckers? Then also there was like a physical fear, like, are they gonna come get me if I say the wrong thing? But all that to say, we are versed in it. I gave those people some stuff they wanted. I gave my people in the front row a lot of what they wanted, and I got up out of there. I just feel like that's the same thing. I was just speaking on just a comfort level. I can be comfortable doing it, talking just to you, Daniel. But I'm a lot more comfortable and a lot freer when Constance is on here talking with me and you. That's just the truth.
Yeah, I don't know, Constance, any thoughts? I mean, you think about it in the conception of the book?
Well, so I actually want to, before we talk about the book, speak to the question that you didn't ask me, but that's what I'm gonna do because I feel empowered to do that. Because I just had this conversation with my students in American folklore yesterday about performance, and we were talking about material culture and like yellow flags post 9/11 and sort of the performance of patriotism, but we eventually got to this point where I'm saying, everything is a performance. When I come in front of this class, I am inherently performing a professor, and that is very different with how I engage with my children. So don't necessarily think of it as inherently negative.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is still a performance. But having said that, Yesterday's quote kind of reminds me of Baldwin. I think, is it in Everybody's Protest novel or is it in Many Thousands Gone, where he's talking about Richard Wright, who we love, but about this idea of by writing a certain way, like in some instances, he denied Black people their full humanity because he's wanting to show the problem of like this is what happens when you confine, when you deny people, essentially bigger terms. Like when a person is denied their humanity, this is what they become. But in doing that, right, and Baldwin, as much as he's trying to, pay tribute to right, is also saying, but here's what that does, right? I think there's a little bit different from what Kiese does, in terms of, as he said, like in that speech, I have something for my people in the front, but I also have something for this audience expectation. So I think the dynamic is a little bit different because we have a lot more access to our writers than we did at one point. So we can sort of know the totality of them in as much as you can know a person in a way that we only sort of had the writing and whatever, nonfiction prose or letters they wrote, but you just didn't necessarily have that much access. So there's some things about intimacy and distance and authenticity. There's other things we could say, but I won't for time purposes. But I just think there's an interesting, like these conversations are not new, right? So what Kip is saying is not new, like a continued debate that we find ourselves in.
Well, it's interesting. I'm curious, Kiese, like you're saying, you'll give some to the white folks in the audience, some to the Black folks in the front row. one question that occurs to me is like, how conscious is this? Because you were talking about learning these different styles and code switching and Constance, you gave the example of like stepping into the classroom and performing as a professor. Like sometimes that's conscious. I assume sometimes it's not, right? It's like you walk into the classroom, you cross that threshold, you've done it a million times before. You're not thinking to myself, now I'm going to change the way that I speak to these people from what I was, the way I was talking to my kids a half hour ago when I was getting them off to school, right? So sometimes it's sort of unconscious when you're standing in front of an audience and you're noticing the racial composition of it, Kiese, like there's a consciousness to it. I'm curious, like what's the thing that you're giving to your Black audience in your conception and the thing you're giving to your white audience?
Let me say, this Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. That's the name of it. That was the name of the school. And again, I guess if we isolate race, we can isolate race. But also, if all of the if I was speaking at Jackson State University, the entire audience was Black, but they all had on like shit that you would see people wearing to church, that conversation is going to be different than if all the people in the audience look like they just came from class, right? And so the question then is, as a performer, I just want to go back to what Candace said, as a performer, how do I try to play those notes? Like, how do I try to, and so, again, because the people who brought me to Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts were primarily like these Black folk I know well who know my art. So when I start that speech, talking particularly about like something my grandmother said and did that has I don't know, many people in that space, especially that space up in the Northeast would understand. I'm talking to those people right there. But and when I'm talking about a love for grandmothers, generally I'm talking to that room. Because like you can talk generally about like a love that grandmothers might have for a child, and I think that resonates with all folk. When you start talking about the language or something like going to get my switch ritual, y'all. You want to talk about ritual? Who knows going to get my switch? Like I know when I say that, those people who invited me are going to understand what going to get my switch means, the context around it, and I also know that the people who majority are possibly not. And that's okay. What I'm saying is sometimes you get in these sorts of audiences, you see the synthesizing that has to happen for a group of people. Meaning, like, I see the speaker be like, look, audience, I need you to believe that I'm human and educated. And what I'm saying often is like, I don't fucking want to do that human educated work only. I want to do some more important work. But I get why we have to do the like, I'm human and I'm educated work. Especially when these places pay us. That's the other part of it. Because now in my life, I try to avoid that shit. Like when I was a younger writer, I didn't have to go in front of all these all fucking white people and for like $5. Like if you're gonna get me there now, podcasting aside, you're gonna have to come up out that pocket for that performance. Yeah.
I mean, there's another level of complexity to it that I'm sure both of you have thought about a lot, which is on the one hand, I hear what you're saying, like you're performing for a white audience, you have to sort of establish your humanity, your sort of educatedness and things like that, and maybe address or preempt potential anxieties about what you might say. On the other hand, you're also performing for a white audience that wants a performance of Blackness at the same time. Kiese, with you in particular, because I think you've been pretty insistent for a variety of reasons, not doing the respectability politics thing in certain ways. Like what people want when they're paying you their white dollars sometimes is a performance of kind of Black authenticity, which just adds another layer to it. You don't want to be a minstrel, right? And it's, I mean, partially I'm expressing just kind of sympathy, which is these are not layers of sort of anxiety or concern about performance that I have to bring into an audience if or when somebody asks me to speak.
But this is where it's so complicated. I would love to hear Constance talk about this part because I don't even think you should be sympathetic because, like, there's something so exhilarating about knowing you're performing for either group. You know what I'm saying? Like, and what I'm trying to say is, like, our tradition relishes in those kinds of performances. Yes, it can get so weary and so heavy. But I'm saying at this point in my career, you really don't need to be sympathetic for me because they're paying me like $20,000 to perform. You know what I'm saying? For 30 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
You can be sympathetic to me, Daniel, because
the money eases the soul heaviness, I'm sure. But look, you as a persona, and I think you talk about this at certain points in the book, you emanate an immense amount of vulnerability, of heaviness, right? To go to the title of your memoir, right? And so I don't think there's any question. Anybody who's a student of your work, but also a student of you as like a public persona is like you carry a lot of emotional weight and vulnerability around with you. It's hard not to be sympathetic. I hear what you're saying. Like there's a lot of, good fortune you've had. It's hard, not just in terms of my parasocial relationship to you as somebody who I paid attention to just sort of, again, in a long distance way, like worry about you, because that's part of what you project. I assume authentically.
I appreciate you. I appreciate that. Then. I appreciate. I mean, because I think we should worry about each other.
But you enjoy it. I mean, I hear that you enjoy.
I mean, what I enjoy is creating art, and I think that like speaking in front of groups of people is an art that I've come to enjoy. And as someone who had to do that for literally no money, and someone now who doesn't have to, but chooses to do that for like way more money than they should ever pay me, I'm just saying, like, I understand. I thank you for that. But it's also like, it's the best part of my job. It's better than teaching. It's better than writing. The hardest part of it is getting on an airplane.
Yeah.
Because I hate flying. But like, once I get into that room, all of this shit, I'm going to perform, but I'm also actually like sincerely interested in the people in front of me, which is also a kind of performance. But, so that part of what we do is like the good life to me. And that's one of the reasons I'm so, well, when Constance came to me with this idea, I was just taken by it because I used to read like these conversation books coming up when I was becoming a writer. When I was friends with your friend, Jason, I used to read these books like up all night reading these conversation books. And so when Constance came to me with this idea to do the book, I mean, I didn't think that I was like of the stature to do it, but because I respect Constance so much, Constance is like a literary fucking like phenom. It made me feel like, okay, well, shit, if you say it's okay, I could do it. But I'm saying the anxiety around like that performance in that book, that's harder to deal with than like getting in front of 10,000 people and talking about some shit. I can do that easy.
Constance, can you tell me about the backstory on this book and the series? There's an aura to this series from the press and in the state that, not being a native of Mississippi, like I don't sort of viscerally get, but like, tell me about both like the backstory of this particular book, how it came about, and then what is the significance of this sort of conversations series?
So there's two parts of this, right? Academics, at least until you get to the sort of the Kiese stage, we have to publish, right? It's publish or perish. So there's tenure is a thing. And edited collections aren't necessarily like our bread and butter. And in fact, Bacteria probably would have discouraged me, but I felt strongly. I was such a huge personal fan of Kiese as a person and his work. And I also just thought like, well, you're the University Press of Mississippi, so you need to have, and I mean, certainly there are, his and Jesmond's kind of came out right around the same time. So on the one hand, I felt strongly that, everybody sort of acknowledges, Jesmond Ward's literary greatness, right? She won National Book Award twice, all these things. And I think Heavy was so important for so many reasons that people who might have previously not been aware of Kiese's work were like, oh my gosh, this is a up and coming, But I really felt like given one, his essays, given Long Division, which I was a huge fan of, and just kind of his overall, just who he was, like I felt strongly that like the essay deserves a conversations book too. And so, and my thing is always, I've always been this type of person. I'm going to shoot my shot. All you can do is say,
yeah.
Like, what are they going to do? If they say no, I don't have a conversations book. If they say yes, I do, So I saw the editor that I worked with, I think it was Mary Heath. Shout outs to Mary. But I saw her at the American Folklore Society meetings, which is one of my major conferences. And I said, hey, you should really have conversations with Kiese Laymon because you're the University Press of Mississippi. And she's like, yeah, that'd be a really good idea. And there are usually series editors, so she doesn't edit the series, but she was a fan. She's like, yeah, let's follow up, and then I'll pitch it to the series editor and to the press and see what they say. They're not going to say no. Like, are they going to say no? They're not going to say no. But I also was like so excited that I went and texted Kiese, hey, Kiese, this press is going to, like, would you be interested? He was like, oh my gosh, and I was like, now is Kiese being for real or this is like fake demonstrative? Like, is this demonstrative? Like, because I just asked, or was he really excited? And then only in subsequent conversations when he talked about, how much Toni Morrison's conversations meant to him. I mean, I think it just, it gives you a different sense of who a writer is because you have these different, you have these different perspectives. You have these different voices that are coming into conversation. And so, that was really it. And it sometimes isn't that easy, but that was a really, really, it was an easy sale, right?
And can I just say one more thing? Because I just want Daniel, like, I want you to understand how important those conversation books were. And like, this is what I think is important, in this YouTube, everything on the internet kind of world. The 80s, you got Baldwin dying. You got Morrison really, really like becoming, you have people reclaiming Wright, reclaiming Hurston. But you didn't have a place where all of those people's words were actually, that I knew of. And so, like, for us, and young writers who were in the 90s coming up and looking back what was done in the 80s and the 70s and 60s, 50s, like, those conversation books were, like, the only way that we could, like, have conversations, imagine conversations with the people who were making the art that was moving us through college. And so, my entire undergrad and grad life was just spent like mining those books because there wasn't a YouTube. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't read, and I didn't want to go through microfiche and all that kind of shit. And so like they collected them there. And so like and because so many of those books are about the craft, I just want to talk about like you just saw like crafts people talking to other crafts people about yes like the craft of keeping yourself alive as a human, but also the craft of like making art and making a life of art. And there was no other place you could just find it. So when Constance was like, "Do you want to have a conversation book?" At first I'm like, "Fuck!" Like I know I'm not worthy, but I ain't gonna say no to that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I did feel like, of course, but I know I'm not worthy of it. So I'm just super thankful that Constance did that.
Help me understand, like, what do I need to know or understand about what's distinctive about Mississippi? I think there was an exchange or more than one in the book where you're kind of dealing with the stereotype of Mississippi, which is, it reminds me of, there was like a great Saturday Night Live skit where fake Bill Clinton or something was like defending his record in Arkansas. And it's like, we're 46th in life expectancy and cancer rates and like, suck it Mississippi or something like that. I mean, there's this sort of, Mississippi doesn't have a great rep out in the world in that respect, but you both talked about it with a lot of love and affection and I think a pride. And I just want to understand what kind of place it is, maybe in both senses.
What is not to love about, Mississippi. So, here's the deal, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, all places deeply Southern, they're all like hold my beer, in terms of things that are, like seemingly, regressive racist histories and in some cases racist and violent legacies that are still with us. So there's that, right? But it's also a bit, in some ways, I hate to, I don't want to say like the souls of Black folks. In some ways, you get like almost this romanticized version of the agrarian and rural South. But in some ways, it's like if you grow up in Mississippi, yes, it's from Jackson, but I'm from Natchez, right? So when I was in grad school, I said to one of my friends, like a person who's referenced actually, who put me on to Kiese, I wish I could make you a pecan pie, but pecans are just too expensive. And she was like, what, are they cheaper in the store in Mississippi? I was like, no, in Mississippi, nobody's going to buy pecans out of a store. So even though Kiese is from the city, I'm willing to bet that he knows somewhere where he could just go pick pecans. Like I wouldn't
right off the tree.
I wouldn't pay for a pecan, so it's this idea that you have access to the land. You have, I grew up still, Kiese, I'm sure this is true for you still with food segregation. But at the same time, I also grew up with, here's the thing, I while I don't want to romanticize it, I do want to acknowledge that some of this is about like sort of modernity versus, so Mississippi is a place that still, for all that we're in 2025, where you still feel the weight of history and the past. And so a lot of the things that come with modernity, where you have like, you don't have extended families as much because people haven't had to move for work or whatever. Mississippi is a place that still feels very different from that because like, I start almost all of my public talks with quotes from my grandmother. Kiese and I don't know. We know each other in a way, but we didn't grow up. You know what I'm saying? Like we're from completely different parts of the state. But I would dare say that most people who grew up, in our generation in Mississippi were raised within the context of extended family because those kind of extended kinship networks still exist in part because, I think there are some, I don't know, there's not like pre-K. I don't want to make this a political conversation, but it's just the whole thing. And so I just think that yeah, I mean, some of the experiences that you have as a result of growing up as a child in the rural South, that would probably be very similar to, Alabama, Arkansas, but just so happens to be that a lot of the brilliant folks that I know are from Mississippi. So it's a wonderful coincidence. But yeah, I'm not sure.
And I always think about how Baldwin started one of those essay collections with, I was going to be a writer, God, Satan, and Mississippi notwithstanding. So we understand that the role that Mississippi plays, like in the American imaginary,
Yeah.
and like historically, it literally, I mean, right now, it's still the blackest state in the union, which is one reason it is such an, almost 40% black. It used to be like 80% black, right? Until Andrew Jackson, all these people like terrorized, like, first of all, with the Indian removal, like taking all of the indigenous folks, killing them, murdering them, and then, put Jim Crow in, which is another form of like terror. And so our people leave. And it's like our people, where do they go? They go create Chicago, right? And it's still like that throughway back and forth. And they go up to Indianapolis. They take 55 up north. And culturally, like, yes, all that fuck shit is there, but it's also unquestionably the home of American music, right? It is the home. That's where that shit is born. It has like played this role, I think, in creating what people call civil rights. Like, there's no civil rights in this country without not just like the terror that's happened in Mississippi, but like the organic, organized resistance to terror. So it literally is a foundation for civil rights, which becomes a foundation for a kind of human rights argument. So it's it is like Louisiana and definitely like Alabama, but like there's a particularity to Mississippi. Just as I think Alabama and Louisiana definitely can claim. I think the most important thing is that it's the blackest state in the union, and it is seen as one of the most conservative states in the union, which means you have a higher percentage of ultra conservative white people in Mississippi than you have anywhere else in the country. And you have to think, why is that? Like, well, it's because it's 40%. Because that great white replacement theory that people talking about now, like our state has been governed by that kind of shit for like decades and centuries, actually. So, and the sinners can only be sinners, even though they shot it in Louisiana.
Oh, did they shoot in Louisiana? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they can only be sinners because of Mississippi. Like, and more importantly, like the Mississippi Delta, where all of that, everything is sort of made there.
Well, I was thinking of that scene, the famous scene in Sinners where the guy starts playing and then you get the people from the deep ancient past and you get the people from the future and the sense. And you said this constant that like the sense of history is present. I mean, I do think of, and it's Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, like these places where, and it's a stereotype, but I guess what I'm taking from what you guys are saying is there's truth to it too, where like the veil is thinner, right? Like the veil is thinner between the past and the present. And the veil is thinner also, I mean, there's a lot of like gothic shit, right? Like the veil is thinner between the natural and the supernatural, between the living and the dead and things like that. And I just did not grow up in a place where the air felt that way, but I guess it sounds like to a certain extent that stereotype, that sense, that archetype of Mississippi as a place where that's the case is the truth. And I guess maybe one question to you, Kiese, is like thinking about how you've constructed yourself as a writer and a sort of genealogy of like your own personal canon. Like, do you have a sort of personal kind of Mississippi centric literary intellectual ancestry that you've assembled for yourself?
I mean, I do, and I love that question, but this is where like my lore kind of becomes less sort of mythic because I was just born into it. I was born to a member Republic of New Africa. Like, so, I was born to people who grew up in Black Power at Jackson State University. My mother becomes a student and a mentee of Margaret Walker Alexander, who was like, like an incredible writer and figure in the Black arts movement, who comes Mississippi and just loves on us and, writes Demonic Genius and, had written Jubilee and For My People. And so, I used to go to Margaret Walker's house and I would just be like, man, I gotta go, we gotta go over there again. Like, I guess I could have turned my back to what I was born into, but I did not. And so, like the thing about it is that's really a great question because once I really started taking writing seriously, I just wanted to be one of the best writers in Mississippi of my generation. Like, and I can say that now because it doesn't sound so crazy, but when I'm at Oberlin and I get kicked out, and for me, I had to leave Mississippi because of some violence. Like that shit, that's what happened.
You got kicked out of Millsaps, right? Not Oberlin, yeah.
Right. I got kicked out of Millsaps and then went to Oberlin. When I get there, I'm thinking about how to get back, but I'm also being like, can't go back to Mississippi without something. You know what I mean? Because I just realized I had to have something. Like Baldwin would call it a hustle, but so I'm just saying like the art and the bookmaking that that I eventually did is all in response to Margaret Walker, Richard Wright, Eudora Welty, Jesmond, for sure. Do you know what I'm saying? Faulkner in this other way, Etheridge Knight. So like I'm always thinking about Mississippi artists. Big Crit. I'm always thinking about Cassandra Wilson until I found out
And Moody.
Ann Moody. And we don't talk we never talk about Ann Moody enough. And like that probably is the best memoir to come out of our state. Yeah, so I never was like I want to be the best in the world. I was like I want to be one of the best in Mississippi because low key I know if you want the best in Mississippi, you one of the best on earth at art. So and the thing about Hanging Moss, can I just say I lived off of Hanging Moss Road, and I remember some of my friends sometimes would come from the north, and then at night they'd be like, "Oh shit, what is that?" And I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Like, what's hanging from that tree?" And I'm like, "That's moss." And they're like, "Oh," and then I'm like, "Oh, you go other places and you realize that shit only comes out for Halloween." But also the history of our state, which is like, way too often, those were black bodies hanging from trees. And so there's a way that like the nostalgic and the present are always. I think this is true everywhere though.
Yeah.
But I think Mississippi is just more, in your face.
One of the interesting choices you made, Constance, was to include that transcript of that. I think it was an NPR produced story on this sort of end of the Mississippi flag, or the end of the old Mississippi flag that had this sort of Confederate flag embedded in it. And I was sort of, when I started that, my thought process, I was like, I don't know, is this a good idea? Because Kiese, you're like 1/8 of it or something like that. You're not the main character. You're kind of one of the supporting characters. And I ended up thinking it was a really good decision, for a variety of reasons, because it did, going back to my question about what is Mississippi, like it did sort of illuminate for me, I think, a lot of just that sort of chorus of voices talking about this, like what the complexities of Mississippi and what was distinctive about it. One thing specifically I wanted to ask that came up in that was really interesting to me is Lauren the woman who designed the flag?
Lawrence Dennis, we went to school together.
I guess not the flag that actually ended up being adopted, although it looks
the previous one. There was like an alternative flag that Lawrence Dennis, who was the granddaughter of Senator Stennis, she designed this flag that people used to like put in front of their houses to sort of like signify we don't want that Confederate shit up there.
That was fascinating. And this gets into the sort of issues of around like race and politics on the left side of the spectrum. So putting us to the side, the sort of right wing kind of white perspective and some of the stuff you were talking about with like the character of white politics in Mississippi, you talk in that, Kiese, about your ambivalence about the way that Lauren and some of the white people who were involved in that campaign went about doing the politics and how you wanted to think about it. And it essentially had to do with like how considerate to be of white sensibilities. Part of the success of that campaign arose from the fact that she was like the granddaughter of this notable white politician, but also the sort of rhetoric of the design was one that was, it wasn't a Black Power fist, right? Like it was designed, like the iconography of it was designed to be acceptable if you're thinking about the kind of centrist, center-right, business people, white, country club, Republican types who are sort of embarrassed by the Confederate flag, but also would be averse to something that was more militant or made them nervous about what it might mean to do this. Like there was a lot in the sort of strategy of it that was designed to be strategic in terms of being sensitive to white sensibilities. I mean, how are you feeling about that these days? Because on the one hand, you sort of recognized the kind of pragmatic wisdom on that. And the other hand, you were kind of like, I don't want to do that.
Well, one, I just want to say, I just think how genius was it for Constance to put that in the because it does exactly what you just said. Is that I think we all need primers on Mississippi.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is like that's recent Mississippi history, right? And the way that flag comes down, yes, is like decades of organizing, and folks like Lauren were on the front line of that. And I understand how politics works. Like you need some group on the other side saying, yes, but if we are going to take this flag down, which among other things signifies and symbolizes Black suffering, you need to have some Black people involved in the crafting of what replaces it. To me, that's just simple, right? And I understand if you've been doing this work and you got this flag out to the world, which is what Lauren did, you could feel sort of hurt by that. But my thing was like, would you feel hurt to collaborate on a flag with other Black folk? And hopefully you'll say no. But if you say yes, then that says something else. So, I didn't think it was too controversial to just be saying, like, if we're actually talking about replacing this flag, you got to have some Black folk involved in, like, what replaces it, right? But I do think Lauren took that. I don't know how Lauren took that, but I could understand somebody being upset that people were sort of like possibly writing them out of a movement that they could argue they were foundational to. I can understand that. I just disagree with it.
Constance, I'm curious, was that the motive in part, what I was suggesting for including that, to give a kind of panorama of like Mississippi and contemporary Mississippi politics in some sense? I mean, what was your thinking?
There were a couple things involved in the rationale. Part of it was I recognized that PSA is still relatively early in his career, and I knew that I wasn't going to get, like, it wasn't going to be a super thick volume. So I wanted to make the metaphoric weight of the collection heavy, right? Like, I wanted it to sit with people. And there's no way to talk about, Mississippi. But I think also there's no way to really to sort of represent what Kiese represents without having something that is political in the piece, right? Because so much of his public musings are about basketball, like bad calls, and Mississippi. You know what I'm saying? So it wouldn't have been sort of true to his. And I did sort of labor with, do I want to include it, because it takes up so much space, right? But again, literally and metaphorically, and he is, such a relatively small portion of that. But again, I think it was such an important conversation because the debate about our state flag spoke to this sort of national issue about, the symbolic value of and the symbolic weight of these monuments and symbols of the Confederacy. Again, I was born in a hospital named after Jeff Davis. So, the weight of these historic symbols and these monuments is still so present in Mississippi.
My kids' elementary school, when they started, was Robert E. Lee Elementary in Austin, Texas. Wow. Occasionally people, and it was usually like carpetbaggers from the Northeast, like my wife and me, would like bring up this doesn't feel great, right? This doesn't seem great. and just kind of get shut down. And not, I mean, it's Austin, it's a liberal neighborhood, but there was a lot of like, the whole myth around Robert E. Lee is he was like the good Confederate. It was complicated. And then after the shooting, when a lot of these things started coming down, after the shooting in Charlestown, the church shooting.
Yeah. The one that Cash Patel is famously unaware of. Yeah, that one.
So after that, when the politics, a lot of this shifted, we sort of waged a campaign to change the name of the school, which was successful. But the piece of it that was actually most surprising and difficult was after the city decided to change the name of the school, to remove Robert E. Lee, there was a profound schism within the community of parents over what the new name would be. And it became this kind of left liberal, which was the sort of camp I was in, versus kind of more left debate over whether we would name it essentially a compromise name. Like we found another Lee to name it after. So it could still be Lee Elementary. And people were really upset about that. They felt like that was a sort of like a sop to the sensibilities of people whose sensibilities we shouldn't be worried about. One thing I wanted to ask you, I want to read something that you said in one of the interviews. Kiese said, when I was coming up, I didn't see Black people ever talking about themselves in literary form in very generous ways. I saw a lot of rappers do it, and I love them MCs, but I didn't see many people, and I still don't. And honestly, whenever I talk about myself kindly, I always regret it. I ain't going to lie to you. Can you say more about that?
I'm really talking about the boast. I'm talking about like Lucille Clifton has this song about, this poem called like Ode to My Hips. Incredible poem. But I remember when I read that, and I grew up like playing the dozens, but the dozens were like, you got to denigrate somebody. And so like one of the reasons that I was drawn to hip hop was that it was like people who had been denigrated, maybe familially, maybe communally, but definitely nationally, being like, I'm going to like now use language to make myself bigger and bolder and like, more blah blah more than you made me. And I'm saying like even in my life, like when I get pushed and somebody pushes me, I can come out with some, I can come out and tell you, try to demean you by saying I'm better than you. But I wish there were spaces. I try to create these kind of spaces in my classes where people could like use the boast or like the ode to communicate their sense of self-worth. Because when I talk to my class about this, they're like, the only thing we can do that in is like applications to college. And they were like, like we can only brag or boast about some shit in an application for something to get, to get capital. And what I love about hip hop is like that boastful shit. Like initially it wasn't about getting more money. It was just about like figuratively like telling the person in front of you that you were, bigger than they thought you were, or more specific or more refined or whatever. So I think I was just speaking on like how there's an absence of that in literature, maybe for better, actually. I mean, you don't want to have a whole lot of writers like bragging about this shit.
I took it in a different way. I mean, I connected to like what you said earlier about your kind of discomfort when Constance came to you and said, "Let's do this book," which is your discomfort with like, "Well, I don't really deserve this" or something like that. I took it less about like boasting about yourself, but just that there's complexity in terms of how you think of yourself and maybe your exceptionality or something like that.
Oh yeah, right, definitely. I mean, but it's weird. I always tell people like I was never the smartest person in my row at school. I was never the best writer in my row until senior year. I was the best writer. You know what I mean? Like senior year, I think I was the best writer in my row. But for me, this is where that question like deserves some teasing. And I would love to hear Constance talk about this too, is because winning the MacArthur and this book, I think, are the two things that have happened to me that have to make me question like this sort of like subterranean view of literature and sort of like underground way I came into the shit. So it's almost like, once you start getting like canonically recognized, I often wonder what happens. And I feel like a lot of what happens is very uncomfortable and terrible. And a lot of what happens is wonderful and beautiful, especially if you come from like places where you don't have many social economic choices. But for me, it's like I can't just be the underdog scrapping and writing my fucking way into the canon if they make a conversation series about it.
Right. Well, you're in the canon, right? So yeah, what's the terribles? So we talked about the good. I mean, among other things, people pay you $20,000 to just like sit and answer questions for an hour, right? But like, what's the uncomfortable and terrible? What's the danger? Is it danger to your soul? Is it danger to your staying in touch with your voice? Is it actually just things that are like unpleasant personally, interpersonally?
Like Kiese thinks about that. I mean, I just think growing up, if you're raised by old Black women, you're often sort of told pride cometh before the fall, right? You know what I mean? So it's like this idea that one would be excessively vain. Like I don't know that my mom still hasn't read anything that I've published, and I don't take it. I try not to take it personally.
Right.
I just think it's kind of like, well, okay. I mean, it's sort of like, well, isn't that your job or something? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's like, yeah, I mean, there is in some ways that kind of looms heavy in the back of my mind, even though I kind of know that it's not literally true. I always think about that, right?
Yeah. And when you say that, Constance, it's like, my grandmother went from working in white people's home as a domestic to working in a chicken plant. And for FARs, that shit for Black women, getting a line job was the equivalent almost of like being a manager at a regular place. And everybody in that plant knew her as like the best, most efficient worker who never missed a day. But like her name was never anywhere. Like she could never be more than a line worker. And the thing about, and I'm not trying to compare myself to my granny, but I'm also saying that like in the work that I do, that part of the work, I think the teaching is really different. Like you put your name on everything. And so one of the things that happens is people start to think they know what that name means.
Right.
And that can be great, monetarily. And it can be great in connecting you to people. But if you come from people who have been structurally like written out of like having access to what they rightfully deserve, that means every motherfucker understandably, comes to you for anything they lack. And if you are somebody like me who just cannot say no, whether I have it or not, whether it's time or resource, that can become a burden. And like I always, you can feel like you're an ATM, and then you can start to treat your family and your friends like people who come to ATM. So like those relationships, unless y'all have like really hard conversations about resource, money, and persona, which are fucking hard conversations to have with anybody in the world, it can just make things really fucked up. And one of the things I've been like selling, I don't think, I didn't think about this as an artist from the beginning. It's like I'm selling the insides of myself, but and the insides of my family to people, which means a lot. You know what I'm saying? And again, like I'm selling, somebody's buying it. I'm not trying to act like it's the worst thing in the world, but it is completely disruptive of any sense of normalcy if you all don't engage in like talking about what the fuck is happening. And my family just don't come from a tradition of really talking about shit like that. So it can be really bad on friendships and on relationships and mentally, psychologically. It can just be really it can be really hard on your psyche. But I would rather have that problem than having the problem before I had when nobody gave anything I wrote
Yeah.
time. So I'm not trying to pull mouth like my grandma would say.
Do you worry at all? One of the things I'm fascinated by is the arc of writers' careers and what has to be in place for them to do their best work. And I'm curious, both because Heavy was so successful and so frankly brilliant, and I assume you kind of hit it out of the park on that one. Do you have that like next book anxiety? I think there's a lot of expectation around what is the next big book you're going to do, whether it's a novel or it's a nonfiction book. Does that haunt you at all? Or are you kind of far enough along in your life and kind of centered and grounded enough that you feel like you've got it?
I mean, the next thing I make, I always wanted to be better than the previous thing. So yeah, there's a little bit of like I made Heavy not perfectly, but I made it well, you know. So I mean, so then partially it's like, yeah, how can you make something better? But the overwhelming anxiety I have is just it's just the thing I'm making and that'll be coming out next year. It's just the first thing I made without my center being alive, which is my grandma. That's sort of been my superpower. Like I can try shit on the page. I can ultimately write books. I can try things that like I probably shouldn't try because I knew she was alive and I knew she loved me, like whether or not I made another sentence or not. And she died, and so I've been having to write without her. And again, I'm not saying woe is me. Everybody got to deal with death. People have to deal with death of their children, their spouses, you know, their mothers and their fathers. But I never made nothing to give to people without my granny being alive. And that is the harder part. And thankfully, that makes, you know, because I'm so into that, I'm not into like the anxiety of like, how do I beat Heavy? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, whereas if she were alive, I would be like, fuck, like, how do I beat Heavy? How do I beat Heavy? And
Wait, I'm not sure I understand. Actually, I'm not sure I understand that. Like, what was it about her being alive? I understand the first part of what you're saying.
because if I didn't beat Heavy, like if she were here, I also would just feel like I had that sort of battery in my back to where yeah, I want to tell the truth. I want to fucking make beautiful art, but like, okay, you gotta go be happy. You know, like my granny gave me like the extra oomph.
Grandmas empower you. Everything you do is brilliant to your grandmother, or at least
Yeah,
Southern Black grandmothers. It's like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, baby, this is wonderful and brilliant.
I believed it. My problem is I believe when she would say that shit, I would, you know, because the world be telling you you're not shit. That's what I always talk about when I had chicken pox. And this first time I look in the mirror, and I'm like, oh, I'm finna die. Like I had, like I'm like my whole body is scabbed. And like I'm like nobody. Like I'm literally I remember sitting in the mirror and then she came and she had on this white motherfucking usher uniform and she kneeled down and she hugged me, got all that chicken pot gook all over her fucking like and I was just like, yo, this motherfucker love me, dog. Like, you know, like that's what she did for me my whole life. Cause I mean, you steady feeling ugly up in this earth. And my granny was just like, and it wasn't the cool thing was it wasn't just me. She made her whole family, everybody she came in contact with. Now I feel ugly.
Does that mean that, like, I mean, obviously, the greater part of this, the biggest part of this is kind of the grief and the kind of lack of that kind of center of your identity. But also, sometimes when people who function that way for us die, there's also a kind of liberation. There's a psychological. Is there a lightness? Are you lighter?
That's a great question. My family, I think everybody in my family has moved to that space. And I'm so thankful that they have. I think I have not.
You're not lighter.
Oh no, it's complicated for why, but yes, that's not no way. No, because in a lot of ways, I was my granny's extension of the center. You know, like I was the one she could count on to like, you know, take care of the money shit in the house and take. So like, I was that. And so when she left, I felt like I needed to double down and be more of that. And then you realize when people die, often families do what you just said. Like, there's a burden and they go separate ways and they don't fuck with each other. But as someone who's an extension of the center, I thought I'm supposed to create a center where they all come back to. And so I've been spending the last year trying to create that, and it's just not happening. So I need to let that go.
I was going to ask Constance. I mean, this is a question for both of you, but like I was going to ask you first, Constance. Is it hard for you to be outside of Mississippi? You're in Georgia now. Is it hard to be outside of Mississippi? Is it liberating? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, but I don't go back as often as I would like, in part because of time constraints, parenting, and resources. I go back when I can, but it's a push pull, right? There's so much joy and pain, right? But there's this, especially in terms of thinking about the weight of my grandmother, and needing to and wanting to spend time and she would want me to come back home, right? To go spend time at the family house and stuff like that. So despite a lot of limitations, I try to kind of have almost an annual pilgrimage. I feel like when I can be intentional about it and like go for a conference so that way the university can like pay for my trip to Mississippi. And I'm trying
Yeah,
to
that's real.
I prefer that. But the thing that I hate is my son was my oldest child. That's my oldest and my youngest were born in Mississippi. So I hate that they don't have the relationship with the state that I do, because even as it's complicated, I still feel like that's home, right? You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
if somebody had to ask me, that's what I would say. And I don't know that they could say that. So that's the thing I think that I regret probably the most, because a lot of times I am going under the pretense of like an academic, thing, or like I want to have some nostalgia. Let me go, kick it with my friends. So it's not like I need to probably take a family trip to Mississippi. Is what I need.
You know what, Constance? Like when you said that, when I first started teaching at Vassar, I was an adjunct, and then I became an assistant, but I wasn't making any money. But I used to stay going home, and they had that little research fund. You had to justify. I hope I don't get in trouble for this shit, fam. I would be making up the wildest shit. I'd be like, I'm going to Mississippi to interview porters.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'd be going back, and I was driving, and like even then, like that kind of expensive. Or I'd be like, uh, I'm going to talk to the architect who designed my town. Like just so I could get the gas, the mileage
Yep.
paid
It's a
for.
real thing. I did that. I had to make that hump. I had to make that drive. But also, in some ways, I'm still doing that. Like I am a folklorist, so that I can say, I'm doing an ethnography on car
Right.
and I'm doing an ethnography on homecoming foodways, and I need
Yes,
to,
man.
like I have to go and experience the people.
That's so real. That's so real.
Kiese, I want to read something you said. I used to think it definitely meant that you need to be there. I think that there is Mississippi, but I don't know if I can be there and be healthy. So you were at Vassar, and I think you've written about this a fair amount. Like when you were away, there was a kind of powerful gravitational pull to go back, and now you're gone again. You're at Rice. The part of it, like, I don't know if I can be there and be healthy. Like, what's the health? Is it physical health, mental health?
Yeah, the problem for me is that Mississippi is just really good at harming its own.
Hmm.
I mean, you can argue that for other places. I don't know, but I'm not on great terms with the governor. I'm not on great terms with the legislature. Like this is just real talk. You know what I mean? Like I know that the governor during the Mississippi Book Festival, when they had my name on the highway, I know allegedly the governor told people to take my name off the highway. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like I
Right.
got kicked out. I mean, people gotta understand. Like I got kicked out of college for taking a library book out of a library from the most liberal quote unquote college in Mississippi. Like I know Mississippi, and but the problem is there's no question I make my best art there.
Hmm.
I had to come home to make heavy. This book that I'm writing, I started there, and then but I also came home, and I came home to be closer to my grandmama because northern Mississippi was not home to me. Like shit, that was as far away as I could get from home actually, and stay down south. But then you come to a place like Houston, which like I respect and like I love the lore, and I think I love how much the people love it, but it's just not for me. You know what I'm saying? Like that shit is. I'm 51 now. That shit is beautiful, and you can see how beautiful it is to the people who find beauty in it, and I love that for them. But I'm a little too country. Like it's too many motherfucking cars here. I like motherfuckers to be like, "Hey, how you doing?" I like that kind of shit. Like I don't like the city shit, but I really and Jackson is a city, but it ain't really. It's like it's a
Yeah.
city you go to the city.
Listen, it's not. Listen, Jackson. I thought Jackson was like when I was a kid was like a metropolis. When I went to Jackson in April, I was like, where are the people at?
Where the people at? Where the people at? Right.
I mean, I was glad because I don't like the city. I prefer to be in my neighborhood where there are more deer than people. You know what I mean? But so, I'm from the country.
I'm curious. I hear what you're saying. Like, how is Poughkeepsie in that sense?
I could fight. I could fight in Poughkeepsie. The shit I wrote in Poughkeepsie was like the most effective shit I wrote was like I'm fighting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what am I fighting? Like what I feel like this is sort of like crusty like belief at Vassar in a particular kind of elitism that writes out a lot of people and people like me. And so like I'm fighting against that. So I wrote my essay books there. I wrote most of Long Division there. But Long Division is literally, among other things, like a fight up against like what they tell you, should be normative. I could fight. But when it's time to like really write a book like heavy, when I'm not necessarily like trying to fight or prove some shit, I gotta actually like sit in some hard shit and write. I tried hard as I could to write that shit up in New York, and it was so bad. It was just like so fucking bad. Then you come back to Mississippi. I mean, you just start channeling. You know, and I wrote a lot of good shit when I was in Mississippi. And I've written some decent shit. I mean, the thing about Houston is I started kind of dabbling in other genres and stuff, like doing screenplays and stuff. But this book that I'm writing, I'm confident. Like, I think it's going to be a good book. But I know it would be better if I lived in Mississippi. No question. No question. You know, but when I'm in Mississippi, my whole family is like, they can't sleep at night. They're like, Key, Key, Key. You got Key. You all right? Key, Key. You okay? You okay? You know, like, because they know.
They're worried about you.
Of course, man. Like that's not. It's hard to find public Black people who make a living partially critiquing Mississippi who are like okay in Mississippi, who are left alone. That can be political people. That can be like cultural workers, whatever. I'm not trying to say like I'm public enemy number one, but I know I'm a public enemy to people with power. But that's just a fact. That's not like conjecture. So that makes it a little hard for me to be there because my family's always worried. And the problem with me is like I thrive under like that kind of shit. I thrive artfully, bodily and psychologically. I do not thrive.
Kiese, let me put you on the spot in a nice way, but maybe one that's uncomfortable for you, which is like you were talking about how like you want to be the best writer in your row, and then like you are one of the best writers in the row, except the row is like American letters. What is it you think you do that's distinctive to you? Like if you grant my premise that you're one of the best we have, what's your special sauce? How would you describe yourself to another person who hadn't read your work to understand? The one thing I remember saying to somebody, I think when I told my wife she should read Heavy, I was like, it's just a fucking rocket launcher of a book. It's incredibly hard to do that, to just get that level of intensity and vulnerability onto the page in a way that feels controlled and like deliberate. And, I don't know. So that's my inarticulate way to describe what Heavy is. But how do you think about yourself as a writer?
I mean, I think I write into like emotional frequencies that folks aren't used to seeing people write into, and I place those emotional frequencies in a geographic place, mostly in the South, which I think can also give people a little bit more suspension to get to it. And I think I was trained as a fiction writer, so I also just think I understand, or I work with scene. Do you know what I mean? I think that where a lot of memoirs have to work primarily with exposition and a kind of like historicity, which is dope too. But I'm saying in terms of distinction, I think I can write emotionally depthful stuff rooted in the South that is scene heavy. And I feel like sometimes people who can write scenes don't have much to say about the world.
Yep.
And I think that if there is something I can do, it's like I can write a scene, I can bring you into a room, but I can also make those like, grand statements about the world that the room is in. And, for Heavy, it's just like you gotta not be scared. Like my mama's still alive.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like all of that shit is like you have to be not scared. And one reason I'm not scared is because my granny, but also because I'm very confident in like my little set of skills. I need to be more skilled, but I'm very confident in like my ability to make a scene, my ability to use repetition, my ability to like create contrast that ultimately creates depth. Like I'm very confident in that. Whereas in most things I'm not confident, so I don't even try.
How do you, the scared points is like I wrote a few like literally a paragraph or two about my parents in a piece of mine. It wasn't like that complimentary, but it was like not that bad. And my parents are still mad about it. And you wrote,
Really?
Yeah. And like, how did you justify to yourself putting your mom's stuff out there in the way that you did? Or you didn't? It's just like, this is what I have to do. This is what I'm going to do.
I mean, I wrote it, she was with me. I wrote it, I write chapters and I would show her the chapters, and as much as we could, we would talk about them.
Did you give her veto power?
She had some veto power, but she wasn't going to have all the veto power, because if she had all the veto power, there would be no book. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'd be a political scientist writing about the political symbolism of Charlie Kirk. You know what I'm saying? Like, there'd be no I.
Yeah.
There'd be no I. There'd just be like analysis, which is useful. I like that kind of writing too. But yeah, she was upset, but she also understood that I was, as much as I could at the time, and I think as much as a writer could, I was incredibly delicate with my mom. And everybody in my family knows it. That's why you don't see no lawsuits and all that kind of shit. Like everybody in my family knows. Everybody who shared the memories knows that was an act of like extreme love from my mom, given where we had come from and where we are and where we've been. And so, what's she gonna say? I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm literally saying, Mama, we can be better than we've been. And look at these, the country can too. But I can't talk to the country before I talk to you. So like, can we try a different way, please? Like, please, please. Like, that's what that book is. So she, if she could sue me, she would have sued me.
Did it work on that front? Did it improve your relationship to her? Was she capable of that?
Yeah, it improved my relationship to her because she wasn't the only person I was asking to change in that book. Like I was asking
Yeah.
myself, I think more than anybody actually, to change and reckon with like my fucked up past and present. And it enabled us to talk about some stuff we had never talked about. But the flip side of it is that, yeah, like once you do that and your parent is still alive, your relationship is forever changed because your parent is always going to be thinking he might do this again. And sometimes you have to put that out there to protect yourself.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about like writing through abuse. It's like sometimes you have to put shit out there like that so people stop fucking with you. And I feel that way about institutions and I feel that way about relationships. I'm not a hit you in your face first type person ever. I'm not a hit you in your face. You can hit me twice. But when you hit me 3 times and I tell you to fucking stop, well, now I got to get you. You know what I'm saying? Like that's who I am in life. And so that's who my mama raised. And so like she knows who I am. And at the end of the day, like I think she was proud that she put in on that. Like she helped me gather the skills to create that book. And it helped, whether it helped our relationship or not in the long run, I don't know. But I do know she would say it helped her relationship to the rest of the world. And in that way, I'm very, very, very thankful and happy.
That's interesting. I think about this in the context of you talking about abundance. And there's one passage in the book where you talk about how you think about that concept in light of sharing dirty laundry, intimacy, vulnerability, imperfection when you're talking about yourself and other Black people and so on. And I'm curious about how you think about it in the kind of critical discourse. Your orientation towards other Black writers and critics is super generous. And the only exceptions I can think of, and it's not that this wasn't generous, it's just there was an edge of criticism. There was a piece you wrote on Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I think you're also friends with, or at least kind of warm colleagues with, that had some criticism of him. And then you brought up that you have some criticisms of Henry Louis Gates. And I'm sort of curious how you both think about what is, I hate to use this phrase, like what is the responsibility of like the Black writer or critic towards other Black writers and sort of criticism, generosity, like I came up in a culture, and it's a very different culture, like Jewish intellectual culture. It's not that there isn't tendencies towards, over generosity, but there's an emphasis on criticism, going at it with your peers, that I think is very different from a lot of other literary cultures. And I think that must be a fraught topic for you as a Black writer, as a Black critic. But, how do you think about it? What does abundance mean in the sense of like, does it mean criticism in addition to sort of appreciation?
Constance, you want to?
Ooh, child. Okay. This is a heavy question. But in part because I was just having this conversation with somebody last week. We just talked about what's the difference between gatekeeping and hazing, right? Right? Because on the one hand, I want, students that I work with or other critics to be better scholars. And I myself want to be a better scholar, but I also understand that you can't have read everything. You can't have. So I see both sides of it. I think for me, and especially as I think about the idea of abundance, it's there shouldn't be a sense of like vitriol. So you can critique and you can make people better without being, I remember reading, I think it was like Skip Gates, Joyce Ann Joyce, and maybe Houston Baker or something, and some of their like written exchanges. And I'm like, man, Skip Gates came to a knife fight and brought a gun. Like he attacked, like and it wasn't so much like, because within the culture, like it was a little bit signifying. So it was like written. So on the one hand, I felt like, damn, but on the other hand, I also understood that sometimes that is a thing that Black folks do. But I also didn't like that it played out, kind of publicly. But of course, folks don't read essays as much as that. It would have been the literary equivalent of like Drake and Kendrick, but not that many people necessarily read that exchange, right? So you didn't have that kind of fallout. And so I think I always want to be criticizing with love. So when I I think of myself as a coach, right? And I want to be coached. So I want to make my students better, so I think like hey, this is really, really great. Have you thought about the ways in which what you're saying is problematic? Have you thought about that you're reifying or upholding, like you're a black scholar and you're talking about blackness, but you're reifying whiteness because you're trying to use Prestava or trying to use whatever. Why aren't you using a black scholar? So I always try to frame my critique as suggestion. Now, then, like after I make the suggestion, and then you can do that with people you're mentoring. You can't necessarily do that with established folks in the field. So that's a little different because the only thing, I think about stuff like that when I think about abundance, I'll give you a great example. Like my mentor in graduate school is probably the foremost living expert on African American proverbs, right? So he's a proverb scholar. So whenever I see, and this is I use Henry Louis Gates criticism, so it's not really that, but it's also like I kind of side eye people that platform. Like, why is this thing about African American folklore being done by someone who's not African American folklorist? It's really not about Skip Gates. To me, it's about like systems of power because what a colleague did for me was like someone approached him and he's a historian and said, "Hey, can you be on this? I'm doing a documentary on storytelling." And that person who has this huge platform said, "You know what? I appreciate it. I'm flattered. This is a PBS thing, so you need to talk to Dr. Bailey because she's going to be more of an expert on storytelling than I am. Like, so thank you for reaching out to me, but here's who you actually should talk to." So to me, that feels like abundance because that person didn't have to give me that opportunity. You know what I'm saying? But instead they did because they're saying like, this isn't actually my lane. So this is who you should talk to. So when I think about it, it's always sort of generosity. It's not let me rip this other person. How are you doing a documentary on blah blah blah? And you did. It's like actually, you know what? You would do better to talk to X Y Z. So I mean, I always just like what would my grandma do? Is always it's always how I people say you got to give a little sugar with the shit. So that's how I try to frame my comments.
And our tradition is so black writers went at it. You know what I mean? Like Ellison and Wright went at Hurston. Hard body. Baldwin goes after Wright. Too hard. Do you know what I mean? Eldridge Cleaver and Baraka go after Baldwin. But what I like about the question is like it's gonna be hard for me to go hard at somebody. And that piece I did on Ta-Nehisi, that's one of the pieces that I regret writing the most because the critique is there. The critique that I make of the work I hold. But I told him this, like, we were beefing. You know what I'm saying? Like, we were beefing. And, like, when they asked me to write about that shit, I should have said no. And we were beefing over some silly ass shit. Part of which was, like, my jealousy at the fact that, like, he had, Between the World and Me took off. I was supposed to do an interview with it about something. And then, I made a critique about it in public. And that critique, what I think might be accurate, the critique was also like driven by like rage and jealousy. You know what I'm saying? So in addition to like being critical and abundantly critical in our work, we need to also be abundantly like loving in our interaction with each other. I can't write the shit I write and then not realize what I did. You know what I mean? Like and at the time I didn't think I was doing that necessarily. But you also it's that kind of thing we're talking about fame. You also like when people get what appears to be fame, you think that they can't feel some shit, right? And so sometimes like that piece, though it is also generous, like really generous, I think about some of the stuff I write about Ta-Nehisi, I think it was rooted in like something that's not fair, and I really regret writing it.
What's the criticism you haven't gotten, the kind of criticism you haven't gotten, Kiese, that you would like? What do you want from a critic?
Damn. I'm not evading the question when I say this, but within like literary fields, like people are writing really, really, really good, amazing shit about my work. That and they're pushing it, and they're sometimes they rock with it, sometimes they don't. What do I wish? I wish people sometimes would go to Jackson and Forest and sort of look around the places that I write about spatially, and then come to some, and make something of that. Do you know? I wish sometimes, but this is a conversation about black writers' homes versus white writers' homes and which ones get like made iconic and which ones don't. But you know, the fact that like Faulkner's Roanoke shit is a thing. I lived across the street from that shit. Like it's a thing. One of the reasons I also feel like I wrote well in Mississippi is because like I was like the shadows from this motherfucker's crib was like coming into my room. But it's a thing. Meanwhile, like Margaret Walker Alexander stuff, like we're trying to make it a thing. You Richard Wright shit and Natchez trying. right? But it's not nearly as much as like these people. And I think Wright was more prodigious than all those folks. So I just wish people would go sometimes to the spaces if you really want to, know. And it's changed so much, but I think going to North Jackson and seeing what that shit is now, it would be interesting. Going as far as Mississippi and seeing how it's like mostly a Black and Mexican town, it might be important.
Well, thanks to both of you for giving me so much time. Constance, congrats on the book. Yes, congrats on the book.
Thanks.
What's the next book called? What's the one that's coming out?
It's called Good God.
Nonfiction? Fiction?
It's probably they're probably gonna try to sell it as memoir.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'll buy it. I'll read it.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
This has been another episode of Eminent Americans. Big thanks to my editor, producer extraordinaire, Robert Scaramuccia. Big thanks as well to Alec Ownsworth of Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah for letting us use his music for our intro and outro. If you liked what you heard, and I imagine you did, if you've made it this deep into the episode, then please rate us on whatever the relevant podcasting platform is. And if you have any questions or comments, email me at djops@gmail.com. That's djopps@gmail.com. I promise to respond at least until the faraway and probably mythical day when I have such a vast audience that I can't in good conscience respond to all the emails while still upholding my responsibility to my loved ones. Have a great day.